Listen to that for a second. It is just unforgiving, right? That harsh, heavy, rhythmic clanging pounding away right now.
Yeah, it sounds like you're standing right in the center of a massive industrial forge.
Exactly. It's rigid, it's metallic, it is just absolute. But I want you to pay attention to what happens over the next few seconds here.
Right, because that unyielding iron sound is starting to dissolve.
Yeah, it's melting, it's stretching out, and like morphing into this sweeping, chaotic rush of water and overwhelming white noise.
It's pretty intense transition.
It really is. And that transition, from the unbending rigidity of metal to the uncontainable, destructive chaos of a flood, that is the exact blueprint of a societal collapse.
Yes.
So today we are taking a deep dive into J.R. Ahmed's incredibly provocative text. It's called The Mechanics of Systemic Expansion and Hyper-Congestion. And we are going to completely rewire how you think about ancient texts, structural engineering, and, well, the mathematical certainty of human survival.
And to do that, we are stripping away the mythology today. Because when people hear the ancient terms Yajuj and Majuj,
Or Gog and Magog, as they're often translated.
right, exactly. When people hear those names, they immediately picture legendary, apocalyptic, underground monsters. Like goblins with swords waiting to burst out of a cave somewhere.
Right, the classic folklore image.
Exactly, but we are throwing all of that out. Instead, we are looking at these terms through a strictly rational, systemic lens. We're analyzing them as pure systemic variables that represent runaway feedback loops in closed environments.
Okay, let's unpack this because I have to admit, as someone who spends their life looking at empirical data, thermodynamics, hard sociology, my initial reaction to this premise was total skepticism.
I don't blame you. It sounds crazy at first.
Right. I mean, how on earth do we get from ancient religious texts about mythological, world-ending tribes to thermodynamic data and modern structural blueprints? It sounds like a massive, unjustifiable leap to turn vocabulary into laws of physics.
It sounds like a leap until you stop looking at the English translation and actually look at the phonosemantic architecture of the original words themselves.
The phonosemantic architecture.
Yes, because to understand the macro-level physics of these concepts, the actual thermodynamics of a society burning itself to the ground, we first have to deconstruct the micro-level atoms of the words. We have to break down the specific alphanumeric structure of Yajuj and Majuj using a phonosemantic prime framework.
Okay, hold on. Let's keep this grounded for a second. A phonosemantic prime framework. What exactly are we doing here? Are we just guessing at how the sounds of ancient Arabic letters vaguely relate to physical science? Or is there a rigorous methodology to this?
Oh, it is highly rigorous.
Uh-huh.
Phonosemantics is the study of how the actual sound and structural root of a word intrinsically carries its physical meaning.
So the sound matches the reality.
Exactly. Ancient languages didn't just assign random letters to objects. The phonetic structure often mirrored the physical reality of the thing being described. And when we apply this framework, we see that Yajuj and Majuj are practically identical twins at their core.
Okay.
But they're driven by entirely different initial vectors.
Meaning the first letter of each word sets off a completely different chain reaction.
That is spot on. So let's look at Yajuj. Its initial vector is the letter Ya. Now, in this linguistic framework, Ya represents active agency. It is the interface. It's a forward-moving, aggressive, executing energy.
Like the capacity to initiate a task. So
Yeah.
ya is the spark. It's the verb. It's the engine turning over.
Exactly. It's all about action. Now compare that to Majuj, which is initiated by the letter Mim. Mim represents the manifestation matrix.
The manifestation matrix. Okay, what does that mean?
It signifies the physical environment, the spatial reality, or the material outcome of a process. It is the heavy, tangible consequence of an action.
Oh, wow. So they have two entirely different starting points. One is active energy and the other is physical mass.
Right.
But you said they are twins at their core.
They are, because once you get past that first letter, they share the exact same internal structural engine. They both feature the aleph, or hamza, which functions as an interface brake or a sharp acceleration of energy.
Okay, so it speeds up.
Right. And then, crucially, they both anchor on the repeated letter Jim. Jim represents synthesis, collection, and the aggressive gathering of parts into a whole.
I see.
And because it's repeated, so the root is JJ, it emphasizes an exponentially compounding accumulation of mass.
Okay, wait. Listen to this bubbling, volatile sound in the background right now. You hear that aggressive, friction-heavy boiling of chemicals reacting in a beaker.
Yeah, that intense bubbling sound.
Just raw, uncontainable turbulence. That is exactly what comes to mind when you describe that root core, that repeated JJ sound. It literally sounds like a runaway chemical reaction.
And that sound design is a perfect, literal translation of the root itself. In the systemic lexicon of these texts, the root AJJ inherently denotes extreme friction, ignition, and a turbulent, uncontainable surge.
That is fascinating.
We can actually cross-reference this with another phrase in the source text from Surah al-Furqan. The phrase is ma'an ujana.
Which means burning water, right?
Burning water.
Mm.
Water that is highly saline, chemically aggressive, and violently boiling. So what's fascinating here is that the very foundation of these words has absolutely nothing to do with a literal tribe of humanoids. The language itself inherently describes extreme friction and a turbulent compounding surge.
Okay, so let me jump in here because this completely changes the paradigm. Yajuj isn't a who, it is a what.
Exactly.
It's a biological or physical process. Let's imagine a viral infection. Yajuj is the active aggressive pathogen. It is the virus actively duplicating, spreading, and hijacking healthy cells. It's the hyper-accelerated momentum.
Yes, that active yad energy.
Right. And then Majuj, with that heavy mim vector you mentioned, that is the resulting physical symptom. It's the swollen, congested mass, like the inflammation or the physical tumor that manifests because of that runaway replication.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it's perfectly accurate to the phonosemantics. Yajuj is the active phase of compounding hyperaccelerated pressure. It's a kinetic force aggressively gathering mass.
While Majuj is the result.
Yes, Majuj is the material outcome of that pressure, the physical, dense congestion of unchecked accumulation.
But I'm still trying to bridge the gap here, honestly. I understand the linguistic friction, and I see how it describes a compounding surge. But how does Ahmed justify taking a grammatical breakdown and turning it into a macroeconomic law of physics?
Because the patterns are identical.
But what exact systemic disease is this describing in human society today?
It describes the law of unchecked kinetic expansion and hyper-congestion. You have to remember, human societies are closed thermodynamic systems. Whether you're looking at a localized empire or the entire planet Earth, the borders and resources are finite. So when you introduce a rapidly expanding, highly consumptive force, which is Yajuj, into a closed environment, you inevitably create a runaway feedback loop.
And that ends in congestion.
Yes, it ends in the suffocating congestion of Majuj.
Okay, right. And we actually see this grounded explicitly in the text. The source material references Surah al-Kahf, which points out that these forces cause fasad in the earth,
Yes.
which translates to systemic corruption, chaos, and total resource depletion. So in sociological terms, we are talking about a hyper-consumerist population explosion. It acts exactly like a flash flood or a massive wildfire.
Consuming everything in its path.
Exactly. It aggressively absorbs all available resources, water, land, capital, human labor, without giving a single thing back to systemic equilibrium. It just consumes, expands, and leaves depletion in its wake.
And thermodynamics dictates that endless kinetic expansion within a closed system inevitably leads to absolute chaos. The system overheats.
Entropy accelerates. Right. The environment stripped of its fuel and eventually chokes on the accumulated waste of its own expansion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at it through this empirical lens, this supposedly ancient mythological trope turns out to be a mathematically perfect description of modern globalization and unchecked hypercapitalism.
It really is.
We are essentially staring at a textual warning about infinite growth models on a finite planet. But it raises a massive practical problem.
Which is?
Well, if this thermodynamic pressure is a mathematical certainty of human expansion, how did any civilization survive it? If human nature inherently contains this volatile Yajuj element, how do you prevent the system from burning itself out? They must have had some kind of release valve or, I don't know, a containment strategy.
Oh, they didn't just have a valve. They engineered a highly specific socioeconomic barrier.
Really?
Yeah. To stop a thermodynamic surge of that magnitude, a society requires immense structural containment. You can't simply ask a wildfire to politely stop burning.
No, you have to engineer an unyielding fire break. Exactly. And that brings us to the methodology of a key figure in the text known as Dhul-Qarnayn.
The ancient engineer. Traditionally, I know the folklore claims he built a massive, literal brick-and-mortar wall across a mountain pass to lock away the monsters.
Right, but J.R. Ahmed's analysis entirely strips away that literal surface-level reading. The text details a highly specific technological intervention, and he didn't stack bricks.
So what did he do?
He engineered a complex socioeconomic barrier, a SAD, using two very specific metallurgical elements. He demanded blocks of iron, known as zubar al-Aded, and poured molten copper, known as kir.
Iron and copper. Wait, do you hear that underlying musical motif in the background right now?
The metallic sounds.
Yeah, pay attention to the layers here. You have this heavy, unyielding, metallic clanking, that harsh, rigid, almost brutalist strike of iron.
Right.
But weaving seamlessly right through those strikes is this synth-heavy, highly fluid, adaptable melody representing the molten copper. It sounds like an alloy being formed in real time.
It's a great auditory representation.
But let's actually explain the socioeconomic how behind this metallurgy. Why these two specific metals? Iron, fundamentally, is incredibly rigid, right?
Precisely. Pure iron is structurally absolute. It holds its shape perfectly under normal conditions. But under dynamic compounding pressure or extreme lateral force, it doesn't bend.
It snaps.
Exactly, it snaps.
Right, so let's translate that to governance. In a sociological context, iron represents fixed, rigid, non-negotiable laws. It's the absolute boundaries of a society. Things like constitutional rights, absolute environmental limits, or rigid anti-monopoly laws.
Yes, the foundational rules.
But if a government relies purely on iron, if it's entirely rigid, that's a tyranny. It's a brutalist bureaucracy. And when the dynamic, ever-changing pressures of a localized human economy push against it, that pure iron bureaucracy snaps. It is just too brittle to adapt to human nuance.
Exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have copper. Copper is a soft, highly malleable, incredibly conductive metal.
So economically, copper represents a completely fluid, unregulated, free market. It's local trade, localized administration, the organic flow of capital.
Right. It's highly adaptable to the environment, but it has zero structural integrity. If a flood of globalized consumption hits a pure copper economy, it has no power to hold it back. It just washes away.
Which is why the engineering feat is so profound. The text specifies pouring the molten copper over the structural blocks of iron.
Yes.
So pouring the fluid copper over the rigid iron, is that essentially the ultimate blueprint for workable, resilient governance? Is this how you protect fragile microeconomies from being devoured by globalized macro consumption? By alloying the laws?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is an absolute yes. Fusing those two elements creates an alloyed system of governance that halts systemic chaos without suffocating the populace inside the barrier.
It creates balance.
Yes. The iron provides the unyielding regulatory framework, the absolute laws that state this ecosystem cannot be endlessly exploited. This monopoly cannot grow any larger. It creates an unyielding wall against human chaos and greed.
But like we said, the iron alone would crush the citizens.
Precisely. Which is why you inject the fluid, malleable copper into that rigid framework. The administrative application of those laws becomes flexible, empathetic, and resilient.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The macro boundaries are fixed, but the microeconomy is allowed to breathe, trade, and adapt to daily human needs. The system doesn't snap under the pressure of a changing society, and it doesn't melt away when a flood of hyper-capitalism tries to breach the borders.
It is a perfectly balanced containment field. It's a structural, legal, and economic stabilizer. It allows a civilization to thrive safely inside the barrier while keeping the hyper-consuming runaway surge of Yajuj and Majuj at bay.
It really is the pinnacle of systemic equilibrium, a society functioning perfectly within its thermodynamic limits.
But there is a massive problem here. And there is always a problem when we're dealing with the laws of thermodynamics. Physics is relentless.
It is.
Thermodynamics dictates that absolutely no artificial socioeconomic barrier, no matter how brilliantly engineered with iron and copper, can hold indefinitely against an exponentially compounding pressure in a closed system. Eventually, something has to give.
It cannot hold forever. And the brilliance of the source text is that it is incredibly clear-eyed about this mathematical reality. This brings us to the breakdown, the eventual inevitable runaway feedback loop that overwhelms the containment system.
Let's look at the data point in Surah al-Anbiya because honestly, it's a bit unsettling when you realize what it's actually describing.
Yeah, it's grim.
The text explicitly states that this magnificent iron-copper containment system has a designed mathematical limit. It is programmed to eventually fail. The text calls this limit the Wadu Rabbi, the promise of my sustainer. When the runaway feedback loop reaches a critical mass, the pressure becomes so intense that the mighty barrier of iron and copper turns entirely to dust. It is pulverized into Dhaka.
And the phonosemantics of how this final collapse is described are genuinely terrifying when you understand the physics behind them.
Yep.
The text uses the word hadab to describe where this surge comes from once a barrier falls.
Okay.
Now, traditional, literal translations often read hadab simply as hills. So for centuries, people assumed these monsters would come running down from the grassy hills.
Which again sounds like a fairy tale.
Right. But systemically and linguistically, hadab does not mean a static hill of dirt. It denotes a convex swelling. It is a bulging, elevated ridge of intense, unbearable pressure.
Oh, wow.
Think of the surface of a massive hydroelectric dam just moments before it catastrophically fails. You know, that terrifying, pregnant bulge in the concrete as the water pressure behind it reaches maximum density.
It's a wave of pressure that is swollen to its absolute structural limit.
Yes, and the text immediately pairs this swelling pressure with the word Yansilun. When the system breaches, the forces of expansion and hypercongestion are described with this specific term.
What does Yansilun mean in this context?
It implies a continuous streaming or a rapid trickling motion. Imagine billions of water molecules forcefully bypassing a failing obstacle, finding every microscopic crack. It is an unstoppable, highly fluid, systemic migration.
So what does this all mean for us? If we strip away the ancient text entirely, what does this flood look like in a modern economy? It means that when human pressure, resource scarcity, and relentless corporate greed finally breach the structural limits of our global ecosystem, a mythological army doesn't come walking over a hill with swords.
No, not at all.
Instead, the hyper-consumerist culture, the relentless drive for infinite expansion, pours out from every single high-pressure wave of globalized expansion. It is a flood of capital and consumption. It bypasses all legal boundaries, all national borders, all environmental protections.
Just flows right through.
It acts exactly like water trickling through the cracks of a shattered iron wall, flooding the planet until the entire closed system collapses under the weight of its own uncontainable congestion.
It is the ultimate description of a civilization consuming itself. It is a mathematical certainty translated into metaphorical poetry. The swelling pressure wave of human expansion finds every crack, every weakness in the legal and moral structures we've built, and it rapidly trickles through, eroding the foundation until the floodgates disintegrate entirely.
If you take one thing away from Ahmed's audit of these texts, it's that this is not fantasy. It's not a fairy tale about ancient kings and literal monsters hiding in a cave. It is an urgent, highly technical warning. Civilizations only survive if they can engineer and maintain balanced, alloyed laws against unchecked greed. A society that prioritizes endless kinetic expansion over equilibrium. A society that acts like a viral pathogen aggressively gathering mass will inevitably destroy its own closed environment. The laws of thermodynamics guarantee it.
This raises an important question, though. If the ancient metaphor warns us about the absolute necessity of blending unyielding structural iron with flexible administrative copper, well, how are our own modern institutions holding up?
That is the big question.
How are our global economic policies, our climate agreements, our international trade laws faring under the immense compounding weight of globalized hypercongestion? Are we maintaining the barrier, or is the iron already rusting and snapping?
That is the exact question we want to leave you to mull over today. Look around at the world right now. Look at the economic data. Look at the environmental depletion. If our modern globalized world is currently living in the swollen, highly congested material phase of Majuj, that phase of immense hypercongestion and massive accumulation of mass, then we have to ask ourselves a very difficult question. Are we already feeling the initial unstoppable trickles of Yansilun bypassing our borders, bypassing our regulations, and flooding our economies right now? Has the structural iron of our global society already become too brittle to hold back the wave? As you leave this deep dive, listen to that rising digital wave of pressure swelling in your ears right now. It is building, elevating to an almost unbearable peak. And right before it breaks into absolute silence, overlaid with that faint, high-frequency static, ask yourself, how close are we to the dust?